So Defense Minister Reznikov is out. I'm going to talk about who replaced him and what's going to happen next for him in this. Now, it's RT and Pravda were having a good time with this. They were gleeful that Reznikov was removed. Zelensky moves to fire a defense minister, and they add a little punch to it. Reznikov assumed the post back in 2021, shortly before the conflict with Russia and Ukraine broke out. His tenure has been marked by multiple corruption scandals. Reznikov's not dirty. Some things happened below him, and he's responsible for it, but he was actually fairly effective as the defense minister. Zelensky sacks Defense Minister Reznikov amid failed counteroffensive and corruption. Okay, so they added the failed counteroffensive part to it in Pravda's article about it. Let's look at The Guardian, see what The Guardian had to say. Volodymyr Zelensky sacks Defense Minister and lines up a replacement. So I'm only going to highlight one line from here, and then we're going to go on to a second one. Volodymyr Zelensky has announced his intention to replace his defense minister, setting the stage for the biggest shakeup of Ukraine's defense establishment. And it is. It's a pretty significant thing to remove this person in the middle of the war. But we got to also understand that one person is good at a certain level, but somebody else might be better at some other thing or worse than another. And we have to balance that, and that's what Zelensky's doing. Let's look at this article, and also in The Guardian. Ukraine's defense minister resigns after Zelensky moves him from his post. Ukraine's defense minister has submitted his resignation letter after Volodymyr Zelensky removed him from his post on Sunday night. Reznikov, whose ministry has been hit by corruption scandals, said he had written to the chair of Ukraine's parliament, confirming that he was stepping down. Reznikov noted that Ukraine had liberated over 50% of the territory temporarily occupied by Russia, and added, "Every day our defenders are moving forward." And there's his actual letter, and in his nightly video address, Zelensky said that he was replacing Reznikov with Rustem Umerov. Okay, I didn't know anything about Umerov before, but I do know a bunch about him now. An ex-businessman, former parliamentary deputy, Umerov is a Crimean Tatar. Now that's interesting because they're sending a very interesting signal to the Russians about who they're putting in place, and I'll talk about that in just a moment. The leading representative of the peninsula's Turkic Muslim minority, Reznikov may soon be appointed as Ukraine's ambassador to London. I was very glad to hear that, because Reznikov has actually done a lot. There was an article I just saw yesterday how Ukraine had collected over $100 billion from Western partners in defense of Ukraine, just militarily. So he's been reasonably effective. Now, there were the corruption scandals that were haunting him, even though I don't think his hands were dirty. It happened beneath him. It happened on his watch. So being redeployed to be the ambassador to Britain, I think, is a good idea. Downing Street is likely to welcome the appointment of Reznikov, who is a known and trusted figure. He played a key role in building good personal relations with Ukraine's internal partners, including the U.S. Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, and former UK Defense Secretary Ben Wallace. Reznikov's ministry has been hit with corruption scandals. It's true. It has been. Two senior officials were dismissed after allegations that the ministry had inflated contracts for food and supplies to troops, including eggs. The latest allegations involve the delivery of winter coats. Zelensky has been trying to tackle corruption. Last month, he fired the heads of regional military recruitment centers who allegedly took bribes from men seeking to avoid being sent to the front line. So, bad thing after bad thing after bad thing happening in relation to corruption in the Ministry of Defense. And so Zelensky, as the person tasked with cleaning out the corruption, this is a good move for him to do that. But Reznikov was effective at his primary task, which was working with partners to acquire the kinds of military supplies that his army needed. I've decided to replace the Minister of Defense of Ukraine. Oleksiy Reznikov has been through more than 550 days of full-scale war, Zelensky said. I believe the ministry needs new approaches and other formats of interaction with both the military and society as a whole. So he's not saying bad things, but Reznikov, he's past his expiration date here. Reznikov has not been personally implicated in scandals, and I believe that he's personally clean, but he did not he did not stop corruption from happening. And has dismissed criticism from journalists. Defense ministry sources insist Reznikov, a lawyer, is not a corrupt guy, but they acknowledge that he has completely failed to get on the front foot over these allegations, and it was bad PR. And you can't really afford this bad PR. You can't afford, because of his errors, to potentially lose Western partners. In his resignation letter, Reznikov provided an overview of his 22 months in this post. There is an understanding that Ukraine is a shield of Europe and in the East, he wrote. The continued supply of Western military assistance is essential for Ukraine if it's to defeat Russia on the battlefield. There are signs that Ukraine's advance has recently gained momentum, with Russia's first heavily fortified line of defense finally breached, and this just happened last week. On Monday, Deputy Defense Minister Hanna Maliar said that Kyiv's forces had retaken about 3 square miles of land in the past week around the Russian-occupied city of Bakhmut. There was further success on the southern Zaporizhia front. Now, this guy, who I'm not even going to try to pronounce that, Zoro Good, I can't even pronounce his name, said that Reznikov has played a pivotal role in forging long-term partnerships with key foreign allies. He really has. He's done a masterful job with that. And so being redeployed as the ambassador to Britain, I think, is a great idea. Yuri Sak, advisor to Ukraine's defense ministry, said that Reznikov's departure was not a surprise. He told The Guardian, "We saw it coming. President is in charge. He thinks it's the right thing to do at this stage. Reznikov's role in helping Ukraine defend itself cannot be overestimated. He made the impossible possible." And when you really think about it, he was there from the beginning, making it actually happen. Zelensky said that he expected Parliament to approve Umerov's appointment, adding that Umerov, quote, "does not need any additional introduction," unquote, and that autumn is a time for strengthening. Umerov headed Ukraine's state property fund since September 2022 and played a role in sensitive wartime negotiations on, for example, the Black Sea grain deal. So he's a known entity, and he doesn't come with baggage, and that's really what this is. Quote, "He's a zero problem person. No scandals," one defense ministry source pointed out on Monday. And that's really what they needed. They needed somebody who didn't have all this baggage attached to him. He also had excellent relations with Turkey's president, Recep Erdogan, and that's going to be important. Turkey has constantly maintained that Crimea is part of Ukraine, and this new guy is actually a Crimean Tatar. Tatar is like related to Turkey pretty closely ethnically, and he's also Muslim. And so for a number of reasons, this guy Umerov looks like he's a good fit for the next phase. And sometimes in leadership, the leader in charge is not necessarily the leader that should be in charge in the next phase. Umerov was closely involved in negotiating prisoner swaps with Moscow, brokered by Ankara. Umerov has been praised in Ukraine for his record at the Property Fund, which oversees privatization of state assets, and has been embroiled in corruption scandals before he took charge. The article, I had to read that a couple times when I first read it. The State Property Fund had been embroiled in corruption scandals before he took charge. So that's where this lies. Now let's talk a little bit more about Umerov himself, who is Ukraine's next defense minister. And this is really important, because if they get this right, a lot of good things can happen. If they get this wrong, some bad things can happen. Rustem Umerov, who is poised to become Ukraine's new defense minister, is a leading member of the Crimean Tatar community. On Sunday night, Volodymyr Zelensky named Umerov as the successor to Reznikov, who's stepping down after 22 months in the job. Umerov was born in Soviet Uzbekistan. The country his family had been exiled to under Stalin, and moved back to Crimea in Ukraine as a child. Now, are you seeing the picture here? Like, this guy is not just competent. We already talked about some of his competence, and we'll talk more about that, but he's also symbolic in a very significant way when they're trying to take back Crimea. Since annexing the peninsula in 2014, Russia has persecuted Crimea's Tatars, who account for 12 to 15% of its 2 million residents. Now, this number is going to be important, and I'll show you why. Umerov's appointment is a clear signal that Kyiv is determined to expel Russia and its occupying forces from Crimea. Umerov started out in the telecom business in 2004 and was a successful businessman, and in 2019 he was elected to parliament. He served as a co-chair of the Crimean Platform, an international diplomatic effort aimed at reversing Russia's annexation. So he's been involved here all along. In September last year, he was named head of the State Property Fund, a particularly tough role in Ukraine, where the process of privatization has been plagued by corruption. Umerov, 41, is not associated with any scandals, and that's a feather in his cap. He's also known to have close personal relationship with Turkey's President Erdogan, another feather in his cap. He was part of Ukraine's delegation in negotiations with Russia in the first weeks of the war, another feather in his cap. According to reports, he was a victim of suspected poisoning after meeting with the Russian oligarch Roman Abramovich. Okay, another feather in his cap, like they even tried to take this guy out. Umerov participated in talks on establishing the export corridor of Ukrainian grain through the Black Sea. Another point in his favor, the Crimean Tatars were once the biggest ethnic group in Crimea. Successive rulers in Moscow persecuted them, beginning with Catherine the Great in the late 18th century, including Stalin, who in 1944 ordered the deportation of the entire Tatar population, of which his family was part of that. The Tatar community largely boycotted the Kremlin's sham referendum in 2014, which it used to justify annexation. So in 2014, the Tatars largely boycotted. What percentage of the population were they? 12 to 15%. Let's look at this and go and see the Crimean status referendum. Remember, they said that the official result from the Autonomous Republic of Crimea, the vote, the sham referendum that they had, was 97% vote for integration of the region of the Russian Federation, with 83% voter turnout. Really, you're going to have 83% voter turnout in Crimea, and the Tatars, which are 12 to 15% of the population, boycotted it. So what you're saying is that you had essentially a 100% voter turnout, except for the Tatars, and they voted at 97% to join Crimea when there weren't really a lot of Russians that were imported yet. I mean, come on. At any rate, so Rustem seems to be a pretty good dude. And what's important here is to understand that personnel is policy, right? The Leadership Institute talks about this in their Laws of the Public Policy process. Personnel is policy. Who you put in place makes a significant difference in how things are going to go. This guy is not only corruption-free and he's been plugged in, but he's also very symbolic of what Russia is going to lose and Ukraine is going to take back. And that's, I think, one of the motivating reasons, beyond cleaning up corruption, why this particular guy is the next defense minister of Ukraine. Okay, I hope that helps you understand. I'm pretty confident that they're going to be moving forward in a positive way with this guy, but I'd love to hear what you have to say. Thanks for the comments below. Thank you for your time. Thank you for the likes, the shares, the subscribes, the coffees, and thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.